Well, hello. Thank you for joining us on this News 9 Digital Extra. Today, we're talking about an Inside Your World Investigates piece, Banks in the Cloud. Joining us tonight is National Investigative Correspondent Mark Hyman. Mark, you chose to do this piece. Why was this the right time to look into some of this cyber activity?
Well, Dylan, first of all, thanks for having me join you. And a topic like this is something we typically don't see in local news. And it seems really complicated. It seems so technical, but it really isn't. It's just people don't think about it. The cloud is so dominant in our lives today. Everything we do personally, professionally, all the relationships we have with banks and businesses, the cloud is a big part of that. And so there are certainly some concerns, and I thought it was important for WTOV9 news viewers to understand the significance of the cloud and what are the concerns about the cloud, particularly when it comes to banking.
Last week, the FBI director warned about Chinese threats, and so this was very timely. And with the piece and this coming out from the FBI director, have things gotten worse over the last couple of weeks?
Well, we haven't seen the evidence yet that it's actually gotten worse, and I want to caution your viewers to so they understand that when FBI Director Christopher Wray testified last week and said the threat's gotten worse, the second part of that was I also want to have authority to conduct warrantless spying against Americans. So he was trying to push the whole renewal of Section 702, which is part of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. So I think he used what's going on and what has been going on for years with China and other nations to push through a separate issue. But nonetheless, there is a problem. China and others are adversaries like Russia and North Korea. They do pose threats. And so I think discussing this is timely anytime it comes up in the conversation.
Let's take a step back for viewers who might not be familiar with the cloud and cloud service providers. Talk a little bit about what they are, who they are, and what we're seeing right now.
So the cloud in and of itself is a bunch of remote servers in which there are databases and programs that store information that are used by businesses and by individuals. Anyone who has photos on their phone, they're going to be in the cloud. If they have music on their phone, it will be in the cloud. Programs on their iPad or on their desktop or laptop, if they use a tracker like a Fitbit or a Garmin or an Apple Watch, all that information goes to the cloud. What we have seen society do, and it was certainly accelerated during COVID, is this movement of taking data from local servers and at home. It could be a desktop where people used to have perhaps Microsoft Word loaded on the desktop itself and Excel and programs like that. It's now remotely in the cloud. There are advantages to that. It cleans up the services that we have on the systems that we use, but also it's out of our control. But just about anything that's wireless talks to the cloud. The smart cars like Tesla, they're coming out with smart appliances, all those Google appliances that people talk to, anything that has some wireless capability is involved in the cloud. So the cloud is actually very important part of our lives today, more so than perhaps most people realize.
For sure. I mean, you said it. It's right here in multiple ways that you wouldn't even know. So let's stick with that idea of cloud service providers then. Currently, there are just a few companies that control two-thirds of cloud service and that are companies. Talk a little bit about that significance.
And that's part of the reason why I really wanted to focus on this, Dylan, because there are perhaps a couple hundred companies worldwide that serve as cloud service providers. But there are three that control two-thirds of all cloud services globally, and that's Amazon, Microsoft, and Google. And if you think about that, not just the US, but globally, two-thirds of all cloud services go through just three companies. In some places, like the United Kingdom, it's even worse. Just two companies, Amazon and Microsoft, control 70% of all the cloud services. So there are many, Europe even more so than the US, are very concerned that there's a lot of data and material and information that's stored in just a handful of companies. They call them hyperscalers. They are so big. And this may sound familiar to some of our viewers because if you think back to about 15, 16, 17 years ago, they used to talk about banks that were too big to fail. They'd gotten to a point, they were so colossal in size that we have to prop them up. Well, now we see a replay of that. We see these three companies that are so massive in size and have so much information they control. There are now concerns by regulators, particularly in Europe and in the US, that they've gotten too big to fail. And it may be a problem because if one of them does fail, the results could be catastrophic.
So, what advice would you give to someone who's looking to choose a service provider? How do you know which ones are better than others?
Well, I'd say for the typical person, their life isn't going to change a whole lot. I have an iPhone. Apple does its own thing. I'm not going to change anything in that regard. I download Microsoft Office from the cloud. So perhaps as a simple citizen, a homeowner, a small family, there may not be a whole lot that we can do with one exception. One of the things I like to recommend, and you'll remember this, Dylan, a few years ago, our own company got hit by a ransomware attack, and we lost tens of thousands of hours of content, videos, interviews, stories already completed. And I was ridiculed before that because I talked to my IT people and I insisted that everything that our team, our investigative team, would shoot, all of our interviews, all of our video, would also be backed up on a separate external drive. So while they made fun of me for doing that and they thought it was overkill, once we had that experience we had as a company, I didn't lose anything because every single piece of video, all the documents, all the data, all our correspondence, all our email was backed up on a separate external drive, something you could buy at a Best Buy or a Walmart or anywhere else where people shop. It takes a little more time and effort. I do the same thing at home, and that's my recommendation for anyone at home. If they have important documents and perhaps they use Microsoft Office, a spreadsheet, a Word document, and they think it's safe in the cloud, I would recommend they back everything up. I do. I probably have a couple dozen external drives. So that's one small fix that people can perhaps rely on is take a few moments, maybe do it once a week, and just back up everything on your laptop or your PC or whatever device you use and just store it away. So sadly, if something happens, they have a backup. The other part of our audience may not be a typical family. It could be a business owner, someone who has 2 or 3 stores or a dozen locations. They're the ones that are going to be looking at buying some sort of cloud service. Perhaps one of the things they might take away from our story is they may not want to kind of cut it short and go with the cheapest available. They want to have that relationship and talk about the cloud service provider. What kind of backups do they have? Will our information be stored on more than one location so that if one location in their cloud fails, there's still a backup? So there is some due diligence that a business might have to go through in order to decide, am I going to trade a cheaper service for a more expensive service, but get better quality work and certainly peace of mind if something catastrophic happens?
And for those who may not be aware, a simple external drive, you can get that at your local technology store, Walmart. You can pick those up, and they're relatively reasonably priced, and it's an easy, as Mark said, quick way to kind of give yourself a little bit of extra security.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's kind of old school, and there was a time that everyone did it, and then we got to a point everything's safe in the cloud. But I learned through personal experience, through our own company's challenge, that the time and effort that my team took to archive everything, we didn't lose a single document.
If you're just joining us on this News 9 Digital Extra, we're speaking with Mark Hyman, National Investigative Correspondent for Sinclair. He recently has put together a piece on banks in the cloud, Inside Your World Investigates Special. Mark, let's shift and talk a little bit about federal regulations. Is there a federal regulator of these cloud companies right now?
Well, the whole cloud business, the whole enterprise grew so fast and it took off during COVID because, as our viewers recall, a lot of people started working remotely, started working at home. So, companies, businesses, government, everybody went to a point where they wanted to put data information in the cloud so people could work on it from their laptops and PCs and tablets from home. And it happened so fast that it doesn't appear as though federal regulators really thought this out in terms of who owns what piece of it. There are actually 6 different agencies that have different components that they look at regarding the cloud, but no one agency has an overall view of what's going on. And that certainly raises some concerns. As our viewers will see in our investigation, one of the experts we spoke to said this is reminiscent of 9/11. He drew the analogy that there were so many agencies in the intelligence business that had bits and pieces of information that suggested something might be happening, but there was no one overall authority that put it all together. And he surmised that if that entity existed, perhaps they would have known that an attack was happening on 9/11. Well, that analogy seems rather apt. No one seems to have an overall view of what's going on. And that is what our country, starting with the Department of Treasury and the regulators, are wrestling with. And if you think it's challenging here, it's even worse in Western Europe, particularly in France, the UK, Germany, Spain. They're very concerned about watching what these cloud providers are doing. And so there seems to be a movement of at least let's know how they're operating, what their challenges are, what their shortfalls are, and how we can play a role in helping them be secure for clients.
I think there's a line of accountability here too with the service providers themselves. They're providing this service for people, but they're taking in very personal information from people. Where's that line stand for you and from your investigating? As far as is it a little bit of it on the CSPs and a little bit of it on the U.S. government, or is it one or the other?
Well, we have 50 states, and sometimes the state laws vary a little bit. So, where is there the line of responsibility between the cloud service provider and the individual, whether it's an individual person or whether it's a business? Generally, once that data goes into the cloud has responsibility to manage it properly. But one of the things we found in our investigation, which I think was a little surprising, Swiss Re is a global reinsurer. Now, for your viewers, a reinsurer is an insurance company that insures insurance companies. Most of us have never heard of them, but they are the beasts in the insurance business. They're global. They know everything that's going on. They know all the risks, and they look at this closely. And Swiss Re is one of the biggest in the world, and they noted this past fall that 90% of all cyber risks are uninsured. And they said that raises concerns with them because cyber costs from failures and crimes in the year 2022 was nearly $1 trillion. So they're saying that cloud providers are not looking at all the potential risks and properly insuring it so that if someone suffers a loss, they can be properly be repaid. Now, there's one point that goes on with that. The US government is now considering something they implemented after 9/11. After 9/11, they implemented something called the Terrorism Risk Insurance Program. When there were these catastrophic losses, they said, okay, maybe private industry can't cover all of it. The federal government has a role. So they built this program in which there's a shared responsibility between public and private in terms of ensuring the enormous losses. They're now looking at that as a possibility in the cyber world as well, so that if there is some sort of catastrophic cyber failure, that it doesn't fall strictly on the shoulders of the cloud providers and their insurance companies, that maybe the federal government has to step in order to provide some financial relief, because they don't want cloud providers to withdraw or to set limits on what they're going to do. They believe overall that cloud services are in the best benefit of everyone, despite the risks.
We have a few minutes left. Let's wrap up talking a little bit about threats. In particular, in the first part of your story, you mentioned that there are internal and external threats. Talk a little bit through those and what people, maybe viewers at home, might be able to catch if they are, looking for something, a threat.
Well, in no particular order, but I will start off at the top. External threats often include state actors. By state actors, we mean those adversarial countries like Russia, China, North Korea, to a lesser extent, Iran. And even before the Russia invasion. The Ukraine actually was a global leader in cyber crimes. So those countries had the potential to go in from either a government perspective, like the Chinese Ministry State Security, which is their version of the CIA, likes to go in and try to access um, entities, clouds, companies. And then there are the criminal enterprises. I mentioned a few moments ago the ransomware. Most of our viewers probably have heard of that. Ransomware attacks, that's usually just to make money. There certainly is the possibility of terrorist groups. Now, I want to make it clear that when it comes to providing security, whether it's for a business, whether it's at home, or whether it's for a cloud, we all have to work and be 100% accurate. We have to be on the job the whole time. The bad guys only have to be successful one time. That's it. Sometimes it might be a lucky keystroke. So even a terror group poses a potential threat. Perhaps not a very large threat, but it just takes one person to get through and to do something, whatever that something is. Those are the external threats. Internal threats, a disgruntled employee. In fact, during my investigation, while we couldn't go on the record with the company and the name, we did learn there was a company that actually fired a senior IT official before they pulled his access and clearances. So before he left the building, he actually wiped the servers clean of the entire company, and he's now serving time in prison. But that's why companies today, before they fire someone, they often remove their credentials, remove their access to the systems at work before they let them know we're going to let you go. So the internal actor is the disgruntled employee. And then there are things like a massive system failure, probably less likely for some of the bigger players because they have a lot of redundancy built up. They have their own backups to their servers. And then the natural disasters. At the end of the day, an earthquake, a tornado, a flood can impact what goes on. The bigger companies, we believe, and what we've seen from our investigation, like the Amazons and the Microsofts of the world, tend to have lots of redundancy. But the lesser expensive, more affordable companies may not have the redundancy, and that's where the risk is.
You mentioned it could be as simple as a keystroke for some. When a breach happens, how quickly can that spiral for a company or an individual?
One of the things I point out in our investigation was we learned late in this country, actually globally, that Chinese hackers actually got into some of the major technology companies around the world. This was discovered in 2016, and the belief was the Chinese hackers may have gotten in as early as 2010. So for 5, 6 years, they ran rampant throughout cloud companies and businesses without being detected. And most of that was probably based on industrial espionage. But the evidence suggests that most of their access came from what we all hear of at work, simple phishing. They sent phishing emails to an administrator who had high access to an IT system and got in through that way. So even though we tend to think of these really brilliant hackers who know how to keystroke their way in and beat systems, it went back to the basic someone took an email, revealed information, hackers got in that way, and that's how they damaged the systems, or certainly um, damage is probably isn't the right word, but certainly access information they shouldn't have for a long period of time.
So, with all of our conversation that we had, what would you say are those simple things that people should take away with them when it comes to giving themselves maybe an extra layer of security?
At the end of the day, we think there is a potential vulnerability by the banking system if a bad guy got in through the cloud. Is it a likely vulnerability? Probably not. Um, I'd just like to point out that JP Morgan, the largest bank in America, hires and employs 62,000 people who only work on IT security. If you think about that, 62,000 employees who only deal with security of their IT systems. That gives you an idea of the level of scope they get involved in this. So, is there a potential threat? Yes. Is it a likely threat? We hope not. Should our viewers go home, race to the ATM, and pull all the money out and hide it in the mattress? No, that's not necessary. But I think they should be aware that there are some concerns. And if it makes sense, if something's a little uncomfortable, ask questions. Ask questions of where they do their banking, at their credit union, their savings and loan, at their bank, wherever they may be. A century ago, people believed they could make their money safer by splitting it up among several banks. That's probably not necessary today. But for the business owners among us, the ones who own a number of shops, two, three, four, six, a half dozen locations, they're the ones that should ask the tougher questions about their cloud service provider. The last thing related to this, particularly goes to companies, is no one should look at moving to the cloud as a way simply to save money. I'm going to put all my material in the cloud, and therefore I can let go half my IT department. All the experts we spoke to said, don't use this as a way to get rid of people, but use this as a way to redirect those people to other tasks. Risk management. Take a look at the risks. Do internal audits. Look at security. Put them to work looking at where you may be vulnerable as a business, and that will work well for you. Moving to the cloud is not about saving money. It's about being more efficient. And perhaps the same thing with us at home. We may not have any dramatic changes, but if people believe they have precious items, family photos they've loaded on their computer, they said they'll be there forever. They're no longer in the shoebox. I scan them, I put them on on my PC, and everything's in the cloud. Well, I would argue go ahead and copy all of those to an external drive. So if worst case ever happened and the cloud goes away, at least all your precious memories are still on an external drive that you can access.
So tonight, if you did not catch the first part, we'll have it again on News 9 at 10 on Fox 9. Banks in the Cloud tonight at 10 p.m. on Fox 9. It'll be an extended look at Mark's story. And again, this is very important information that pertains to just about everybody. It could be right here on the smartphone, or you could have a business and it could be on your desktop. Mark Hyman, the national investigative correspondent from Sinclair Broadcast. Mark, thanks so much for taking some time with us.
Thanks, Dylan. Thanks for having me.